Canadian Immigration Channel introduces the owner-operator pathway of immigrating to Canada. Watch this short video to learn about the benefits of the owner-operator immigration. Immigrating to Canada as an owner-operator is a way of creating a workplace in Canada for yourself. First, you create your own Canadian company. In many cases, you don't even have to come to Canada to become a company owner. Set up a business bank account, register with Canadian tax authorities, create a website, and prepare the infrastructure for a successful start. Now it's time to apply for a work permit and come to Canada to start working in your own company. People working legally in Canada, including yourself, enjoy extra benefits in dozens of immigration programs. If you speak English or French, have experience in running a business or working as a freelancer, possess sufficient funds to start a new business, you meet the 3 principal requirements to start the immigration process to Canada as an owner-operator. Step 1. Create your own corporation in Canada without leaving home. Rest assured, our specialists will make this process comfortable for you. Step 2. Come and get employed from your very first day in Canada. Step 3. Now when you have a job in a Canadian company and the valuable Canadian work experience, choose one of many immigration programs available to apply for permanent residence. Canadian immigration system is changing. Don't wait until it is too late. Start now by sending an email to info@cictv.ca and our specialists will get in touch with you soon. See you in Canada.
Hello my friends, welcome to Canadian Immigration Channel Live. Just give me 1 second. Yes, here we go. We had a sort of a bit of a technical issue at the beginning. My apologies for it. Everything is great and working right now. And welcome to one of our regular webinars, one of our regular masterclasses. And today we will be talking about work experience in Canada. Everything related to work experience, how to prove it, what kind of difficulties might be with respect to work experience, and so on. Just before we proceed, of course, we would return back to this subject later on, but look, all these webinars, all these master classes, they are tailored and designed specifically for you to make sure that we would address your concerns, answer your questions, and help you out to successfully apply for immigration to Canada, to avoid mistakes. And of course, when you ask us questions, right, we're keeping an eye on them, we're keeping an eye on your feedback to make sure that we will be able to tailor our further webinars, our further master classes, so that they would be useful for you. So I'm highly encouraging your participation, your feedback. While I'm talking, of course, my colleagues will be chatting with you, helping you out, answering your questions. And if I cannot directly address your concerns or questions while I'm talking, while I'm on the slide, right, we will of course have time at the end so that we would be able to answer your questions directly, where I would be, just looking at your comments and addressing them one by one in a live interaction, if you will, as much as this platform of course allow us to do this. Now, moving on with this, right, on the channel we have a bunch of things going on and we are planning for more. We have the fraud prevention separate department, if you will, or the separate unit which is constantly looking for fraud LMIAs, fraud job offers, right, and help you out. Those who are sending us emails with those documents know how typically thoroughly we explore this and answer your questions, right? We do have special consulting on one-on-one to address your questions, your concerns. We have, of course, the legal support to help you out to navigate through legal issues of the application from A to Z. We are trying to update you on as much as is humanly possible with respect to current trends on immigration and what's going on. If employers are coming in, right, we of course post those positions, tell you what's going on with employment, how employment is affected in Canada with respect to COVID and how it all works. And of course, these webinars are tailored specifically for the reason of educating you. And as I said, right, I have better things to do at 10 p.m. at night, right, rather than sitting in the office office and actually delivering this master classes, but I want to make sure that we would have this live connection. We would be able to build this bridge, right? Answering your question and making sure that they are helpful for you. They're absolutely free of charge, so enjoy. And as I said, your questions, your concerns, yeah, they are of course highly appreciated. Now, in the future, for future webinars, as I said, we are planning them based on your feedback, and we will be able to address your questions later on, right, in further masterclasses and webinars. As I said, we are planning to do them on a regular basis. We're planning to run them so that we can educate you on how immigration works and what doesn't work, what does work, how to work with the subjects, and so on. So far, of course, we will be talking about job offers. We will be talking about Atlantic pilot and rural pilot, of course, right? We will have a special section dedicated to fraud prevention on various aspects of immigration, because the more we work, the more elaborate these attempts of fraud are getting. So it's quite interesting to see how they work. So far, we got more than 4,000 of different documents, job offers, and so on, right, in our library, if you will, where we look at them, analyze them, try to understand patterns, how these crooks are working and what exactly they're doing. And of course, hot topics such as an owner operator, such as the current trends, will further be discussed on the channel as well. Now, you do have our direct contacts, right? If you want us to assess your chances for immigration to Canada, cactv.ca/go. Mostly welcome. One of my colleagues will be able to be in direct touch with you and look at your chances. The other one is cactv.ca/live, right? That's where you are right now. And that is the direct link for further master classes where you could enroll, where you could go to, right, and participate in them absolutely free of charge. And as I said, they are tailored and designed specifically for you to educate you so that you could learn how immigration works. Now, speaking about today's topic, work experience, let us just define it first before we move forward so that it would be easier to understand where we are standing and how immigration authorities actually look at it. In the eyes of immigration authorities of Canada, work experience, it has two separate parts, if you will, right, or two separate folds should be combined together so that you could always say that this is work experience in the eyes of an immigration officer of Canada. Now, you have to have certain job duties performed at work, and what you're doing has to be paid in some sort. Has to be commission, has to be salary. You might be paid in, I don't know, in grain or rice. It doesn't really matter. As long as you are compensated for what you're doing, this is constituents of work experience. So in this case, right, why I want to emphasize that, because people are asking me sometimes about the story with the volunteering experience. Will unpaid experience work? No, unfortunately not, simply because it's not compensated. Thus, it would not be work experience in the eyes of immigration authorities. Many of you have probably heard about NOC, National Occupation Classification. That's the database of different occupation comprised, categorized together for your convenience, for the convenience of immigration authorities. So overall, this database, right, was designed, tailored, and it's maintained for the purpose of convenience of different authorities in Canada. It's not only about immigration, and many of you were asking us questions how to read this NOC, how to understand this NOC. We got to be absolutely clear with one point, right? This NOC is not just for immigration, and that's why there are sometimes subjects which do not really matter. We will talk about them right now. So when it comes down to NOC, right, it does has all of the occupations, right? All of them from A to Z, all of the occupations which exist in the world, they are in NOC, okay? So there are no jobs on this planet which are not categorized this or that way in NOC database, right? They might be highly specific, they might be included in a broader version of different NOC categories, but they still are there, right? For every job on this planet and in this world, there is at least one NOC code. Speaking about the code, right, that's the last part on the slide. So all the occupations, they are categorized, and each job has its own specific numerical code attached to it. Now, they are, of course, these NOC codes, right? They are categorized by skill, by type. We will talk about skill and type, right? How they belong to each other, and make sure that you understand that the core essence for you, for those of you who are looking to immigrate to Canada, is main duties, right? So when you're reading NOC code, your major article, major paragraph is the one number 3. That's where main duties are listed, right? Don't fall into the trap where you're reading the requirements for employment and say, look, you know what? In Canada, my occupation requires one to have PhD and I don't have one, right? In Canada, my occupation requires licensing and I don't have one, right? Can I apply for immigration? In fact, right, you can, because at the end of the day, what is asked when it comes down to your NOC, right, and what determines your NOC is your main duties. It has absolutely nothing to do with different paragraphs. That's why I decided to make sure that I would just put the specific emphasis on it, right? When it comes down to NOC, it's been created as a huge database for different departments within Canada, right? It's not just for immigration, and some of the data within NOC database, right, might be not used for the purpose of immigration. When you read it, right, make sure that you just ignore it. So all occupations in NOC database, they are of course categorized, right, for divided or separated into skilled or non-skilled or low-skilled occupations, right? 0, A, and B, that's the ones where many of you know, right, which go forward with the application for immigration through express entry online system, right? Remember, it requires you to have work experience in 0, A, or B category, especially if you're applying through federal skilled worker program, right? So the 0, A, and B, what it actually means is these are categories which require an applicant to have a certain education, to have a certain work experience with respect to what you do. And so 0, that's managerial occupations. A, occupations which require one to have at least a university education, and B, a college education. Now, speaking of which, again, if your job duties, your main duties, they fall into A category, but all you have is a college education, it does not mean that you are wrong. It does not mean that you will not be able to immigrate to Canada. On the contrary, everything is fine in here. What you have to understand is, again, your primary focus is on main duties, right? That's 90% of your success in selecting your NOC code. Everything else is secondary. And of course, low-skilled occupations, that are those which require you to have at least a secondary school or do not require any education at all. That falls into category C and D respectively, right? For all of these categories, there are immigration programs. There are programs which would allow you to immigrate even if you're in C category, and nothing's wrong with this. Just got to be careful in selecting it. Now, interesting point with respect to proving your work experience, because that's where many questions are coming, and that's how, in fact, in the first place, we decided to run this masterclass specifically on this subject, because many questions were coming with this area, if you will, right? And we're swirling around this reference letters and whatever not with respect to proving your work experience. Now, the direct way to prove your work experience is to prove it with your reference letters. And today we will share free of charge for those of you who are here with us online. We will share with you samples of reference letters. Remember, I told before that I'm planning to do as much as humanly possible for these master classes and webinars to make sure that they're useful for you, right? That they actually make sense for you, and that you would be able to use them for your benefit. So we will be sharing with you examples of reference letters. You would be able to download them, edit them, and use them for your immigration, right? It's sort of like, you know, a free handout for those of you who are in fact looking to immigrate to Canada and make sure that you do not make mistakes. Now, if you do not have reference letters, and we will talk about it today, of course, right, then we're talking about substitutive documents, right? What could substitute your documents if you do not have direct reference letters for whatever reason? Many of you are in the Middle East, right, where companies are struggling with providing those reference letters, right? Your employer might not be in business anymore, and there are lots and lots of different circumstances around it, including those where your employer just not willing to provide those reference letters. It's still perfectly fine. I mean, nothing wrong with it. So we got to be absolutely sure that we will be able to defend ourselves, so to say, right, that it would not jeopardize our chances for immigration. Now, here's the deal: what has to be in your reference letter and how it should be structured. Of course, it has to be official, so it has to be on a letterhead of organization. If possible, it has to be sealed and stamped. If not, right? It all comes down to the nature of business in your own home country, right? If it is common to stamp it and seal it, do that. If not, everything's perfectly fine, right? But it has to be in a letterhead of organization so that we're able to actually see that, right? That it comes down from a particular company. It has to list the position you're holding, right? Name of the position, what exactly is in there, and of course your job duties. So this is the core, and this is where we're returning back a few slides, because your job duties should be matching those job duties in a particular NOC which you selected. Now, speaking of which, right, there is no direct rule that they should be matching 100%. Right, 50% or more should typically be fine, as long as these are your primary job duties. When we're talking about primary job duties, here is an interesting example. So say I'm starting my day in the office sometimes, right, by making coffee for my colleagues, which does not necessarily make me a professional barista. Okay, well, why not? Because I'm not standing by a coffee making machine 90% of my day, not even 50% of my day, right? At the very best, I would spend like 5-10 minutes in there. So this would not definitely fall into the category of one of the major duties for me. Therefore, right, I may not even mention it in the reference letter of myself if I would decide to obtain one, right? You gotta be focusing on the major job duties. You gotta be focusing on what's important there, okay? Your reference letter has to specifically state your working hours with respect to the number of hours worked, or make sure that it would mention whether you were working full-time or part-time. I know in some countries, right, there is no practice to count work hours. They just have two options. Either it's like part-time, which is 50% of your working day, or it's full-time, right? So when it comes down to immigration, Canadian immigration authorities, they recognize work experience of 30 or more work hours to be full-time. Okay, so it does not necessarily have to be 40. So 30 plus is perfectly fine. Now, if it just says that it's been a full-time position, it's great as well. And last but not least, your reference letter has to mention your salary. So you were paid, you were remunerated this or that way for what you were doing. Has to be mentioned in there. It's not really a matter of concern how much you are making, right? Unless it's something completely ridiculous, right? But what is really important is that it would mention that you were compensated for what you're doing. Thus, it would not be considered to be a volunteering position, right? So verification, we spoke about it before when I said the date, the seal, the signature of a person should be there. But I would say that the official letterhead and verification, these two things, they're going together. So a good reference letter would include all of this, but that's an ideal world. Many of you already know that your employer might not be willing to provide this reference letter. Again, like they might not be willing to provide information about your compensation, right? They may not be willing to list all of your duties and so on, right? So what to do in these circumstances? We would talk about documents which could come in this way, right? Which would be able to substitute those reference letters. But before we proceed, as I said, right? You would be able to download samples of these reference letters. Keep an eye on the chat. My colleagues will be able to post a link where you could get it. It's absolutely free for you to use them. Right now, why reference letters in your work experience is important, because that's probably reason number one for refusals. And that, right, is the point number one, which officers would be looking at when it comes down to your immigration, right? As long as they could see that, well, it seems that you're passing the minimum requirements, right? They take this magnifying glass and start looking at your work experience. So you gotta be adamant and sure that everything humanly possible has been done to polish this to perfection, right? That this part of your immigration application looks nice, shiny, and absolutely impeccable. So I see my colleagues already posting it in chat. So in fact, my chat is on another screen. That's why I'm just keeping an eye in there as well, right? It's like making sure that I would be able to see something which you're posting in here, right? And just we'll want to make sure that we are moving forward with this. So yes, the links were posted. Make sure that you download them, right? And by the way, feel free to drop us a line if you are not able to download, if you are not able to get some information. Look, guys, as I said, like, this time is yours and we're working 100% for you and doing this all for you. Now, speaking about the circumstances where your references are not available, right? What could happen here and what kind of documents you should be able to attain, right? So that to demonstrate to officers that in fact you were performing those duties, right? Well, start with the cover letter. Okay, always start with a cover letter explaining yourself. Even in circumstances where, say, you got perfect reference letter or almost perfect reference letter which does not state information about your salary. This is very common, right? So maybe your direct supervisor is not aware of how much you're making because, you know, it's a matrix structure company where you got two managers. One is aware of how much you're making, the other one knows what exactly you're doing. But regardless, make sure that you state it in a cover letter for officers. Don't leave it to a chance, right? Don't expect officers to sit and dig deeper trying to understand your mentality and your circumstances. If I were you, I would start with a very, very simple cover letter explaining the circumstances. It should be 1 or 2 lines, nothing more. Dear officers, I just would like to stress out a few points which might not be entirely clear from my application. Now, here's the deal. I got a reference letter. However, my reference does not have information about my salary. It's against the company policy. Therefore, I am attaching here my salary slips. Okay, you do not have to attach them by definition. Some applicants are coming to me and telling me that, you know what, I have my salary slips for the last 20 years. Should I attach them with my application? If your reference letter states perfectly your salary, you do not necessarily have to upload all of your pay stubs, right? It's not needed. But if it doesn't, make sure that you provide information about personal taxes paid if it's applicable in your country, right? Make sure that you provide a few salary slips, just a few would be sufficient enough on a balance of probabilities to understand that in fact you were paid, right? If you do not have a reference letter at all, well, other documents which may help you could be termination letter, right? Stating that we are not working with you anymore. Thank you for your job, right? Thank you for your service to the company. You will work in a position XYZ for quite a while, right? That's one of the documents. As we've mentioned before, salary slips, pay stubs, right? Any information from bookkeeping department or accounting department where they state how much was paid and for what will generally help you as well. Duties, right? Your main duties could be listed in your job offer. They could be listed in your employment contract, right? Well, one of the interesting twitches in here that would apply to my friends from Middle East, right, where they're coming to me often, say that, you know what, look, we got a reference letter, right, which states our position, which states how much we're making, but at the same time they are reluctant to provide main duties to us. Well, one of the options to do so, right, would be going to HR department, which may not necessarily know about your existence or may be reluctant to give this letter to you. But what you could ask them for the job description, because typically in any organization, right, before hiring you, there is this headcount which has a job description. So if they hire you as an engineer, right, there is a very brief description of what is expected from an engineer to be performed, right, at his or her work. Now, that has absolutely nothing to do, but if you got a reference letter stating that, you know what, you were an IT engineer in a company ABCD, right? And you go to HR department and ask them, don't ask them for the reference letter for yourself, right? Because they're probably not going to work properly. But if you ask them for the job description for an IT engineer, right? Not for you, but just for an abstract IT engineer, which is typically not a proprietary information, right? There's no secret in it, because based on that information, they typically draft a job ad. They usually would be able to provide such, and these two documents would match perfectly and would work perfectly together. That's one of the examples how creative you might be when you're proving those letters and documents and using those documents to confirm your work experience. Now, we're often asked as well about validity of those reference letters and how fresh should they be. Now, when it comes down to the timeline when you are not working at that position anymore, you're not working at that company anymore, you're not working in a particular department anymore, it's perfectly fine to take the old reference letter, because if you were working there like 6 years ago, right? Nothing has changed since. So you were performing those duties 6 years ago. You're still there, right? You pretty much performed those duties, and retrospectively, this reference letter works perfectly fine. Now, when it comes down to the current one, it's a different story, right? The current one is recommended to be fresh enough. I would say like 60 days, 90 days would perfectly be okay. And I just want to touch the base here very quickly on one interesting point: how not to scare your employer. Okay, that's important, because many are saying that, you know what, if I come to my current employer and tell him or her that I would need a reference letter, right, they would suspect that I would be immigrating to Canada, so they would fire me. And speaking about this tumultuous times, right, that is quite challenging. Nobody wants to be fired during COVID. Now, you gotta be creative in explaining why you need this reference letters. One of the explanation here could be that, you know, you're planning your next vacation going to North America, going to Canada, for example, right? In fact, reference letter for temporary visa to Canada would be somewhat very similar to the one which you might be actually obtaining for immigration. We had a special video on it on YouTube where we were explaining it. Now, when immigration authorities check your references, right, when they verify your references, they would never disclose information to your employer why you were asking for these references, right? So if your employer asks like, oh, is that true that this person is actually immigrating? Is my employee trying to leave me? Officers will not be able to answer these questions, right? So if they are calling for the purpose of verifying information provided by employer. So they're the ones who are asking questions, and questions back are not appreciated. Now, you got to be sure that usually immigration authorities are quite professional and they know what they're doing. So these questions asked, you don't have to be afraid of them, and don't have to be afraid of being laid off just because, you know, immigration authorities of Canada have dialed your employer. Now, what could be the reason for verification of those reference letters? Because lots of people are scared, afraid of what will happen next. Well, we got to be sure that we understand that everything officers deem to be shady, right, would be highlighted and would actually may lead to the circumstances where officers would be verifying it. They would go to the second level of verification, up to actually sending this application to anti-fraud unit, which is working in all the regions in the world, right? And this anti-fraud unit, before COVID, of course, right, they were even able to travel on job sites from time to time to verify employment. I'm not saying that, you know, they would hop on the car, right, and go specifically to your employer. But if something's terribly wrong going on, sometimes they would be able to do that in very remote countries. I think we shared a few examples on YouTube about a year, maybe a year and a half ago. But there were examples from countries where you would never suspect that, you know, officers would have a brigade who would be able to travel and verify it. If needed, we'll be able to post a link on it. But the point is, again, it works, right? And officers verify it. We got to understand that conflicting information, incomplete information, some credibility issues. These are the reasons which lead to the point where officers, right, they start flagging this application from yellow to orange to red, right? So say it could be a circumstance where, you know, your application looks shady because you were working as a senior manager in your home company, right, which where you and your brother are working, right, and you were making $500,000 per month, and your reference states that you are managing a team of 97 people, while it just doesn't look real because your company and website and everything screams that it's just a small home business, right? It could be the circumstances where, you're working as a secretary and you're paid like $20,000 a month, right? Which is completely unreasonable, and officers would set to dig deeper. Now, there are some things where a random check takes place. Not that often, but sometimes they just want to verify it, though this random check rarely goes really, really deep. So they just don't plunge that to the point where, they start to scrutinize everything. If standard verification is passed, everything is fine. And with respect to verification, we got to be assured that the very first source of information for officers is Google. Okay? So they actually do Google, right? So they take your reference letter and they just see what's up in there. They verify this information against information on the company website. If your company has a website, sometimes I'm asked like if it's fine, and if in the 21st century my company, my small business doesn't have a website. Typically it's fine. It's kind of strange, but anyways, not all the companies in the world would have online presence, but typically they would Google, right? If there are online listings, if there are information about your company, how old this information is, right? If the company has a Facebook profile, right? If they got a LinkedIn profile, how old is this profile? Are the numbers on this profiles and online matching those mentioned in your reference letter, right? Like, there might be a slight mismatch because you provided, for example, direct number of your supervisor, right? But if it says a different city or different country, right, that raises an eyebrow, and that's the flag for an officer to investigate further. So reasonability is probably rule number one when it comes down to the point of verifying or not verifying references. Those references we gave you as an example, right? They could be used at any time for you just to draft your own letters if you're looking to make sure that you would be able to polish them and make them look as good as it's humanly possible. Now, I try to do it as fast as humanly possible, right, to make sure that we would be able to get to this part where I am talking, just me, right? And then what I would do, I would be able to switch to answering your questions. Of course, your feedback is always welcome. Sharing is appreciated. As I said, like the main reason for this online classes and master classes is to pretty much educate you, right? We are running them on a regular basis. We're planning to continue doing so for the purpose of teaching you and telling you how it all works. Now, before, of course, we end up, right, we would be going to the session where I would be able to answer your questions, address your concerns, but I just want to take a very, very quick break for my throat so that I would be able to talk to you, sip a bit of my coffee. I would put a very quick intermission presentation in here for, I think it's a minute and a half would be sufficient enough for me to rest just a little bit, right, and get back to answering your questions while I'm sipping my coffee. You would be able to prepare questions of yours so that I would be reading them, answering them, and addressing your questions and concerns. 1 minute, maybe minute and a half, and I would get back to you.
The Canadian Immigration Channel introduces the owner-operator pathway of immigrating to Canada. Watch this short video to learn about the benefits of the owner-operator immigration. Immigrating to Canada as an owner-operator is a way of creating a workplace in Canada for yourself. First, you create your own Canadian company. In many cases, you don't even have to come to Canada to become a company owner. Set up a business bank account, register with Canadian tax authorities, create a website, and prepare the infrastructure for a successful start. Now it's time to apply for a work permit and come to Canada to start working in your own company. People working legally in Canada, including yourself, enjoy extra benefits in dozens of immigration programs. If you speak English or French, have experience in running a business or working as a freelancer, possess sufficient funds to start a new business, you meet the 3 principal requirements to start the immigration process to Canada as an owner-operator. Step 1. Create your own corporation in Canada without leaving home. Rest assured, our specialists will make this process comfortable for you. Step 2. Come and get employed from your very first day in Canada. Step 3. Now when you have a job in a Canadian company and the valuable Canadian work experience, choose one of many immigration programs available to apply for permanent residence. Canadian immigration system is changing. Don't wait until it is too late.
Here we go, as promised. Got my coffee, refreshed myself a bit. Let me just pop up the chat in here. Here we are. And of course, make sure that I would try to do my very best to address your questions, concerns, and talk to you. So you have 1 year full-time experience outside of Canada, have 1 year master's from Canadian University. Are you eligible to apply for express entry? It's like, look, I really like apples and blondies, can I actually buy myself a Ferrari? Well, that just, not enough information to align your question, right, to what you're trying to understand, right? So that your profile and what you're asking is not sufficient, because we have to know your age, we got to be aware of your language test results and so on, right? So at the very minimum, if you got master's degree, if you got 1 year of work experience, potentially that should suffice. But again, it depends on how old you are, right? Depends on your language test results. Can you send your number to? I'm not really sure if it's a question to me. Okay, I completed high school, couldn't complete my bachelor's, worked for more than 5 years in managerial position, got enrolled and obtained master's degree for accredited UK university. Mason, sorry if I pronounce your name incorrectly, my apologies for it, but okay, will it be equivalent to master's? Well, what I would recommend you is to send your credentials for assessment. Probably the fastest one would be WS. I'm pretty sure on WS website there is an online tool which would allow you to assess your degree, or sort of pre-assess your degree way before you actually pay them, right? That would probably be the right way to do that. You could do that in a matter of just a few clicks, right? Shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes to assess it. But if it says master's is master's, right, because it comes down to the point which university in UK it was, right? But usually if it's master's, and it's perfectly fine, despite the fact that you might not have actually completed your bachelor's. So you do not necessarily have to assess your bachelor's for the purpose of getting credentials being evaluated as masters. It doesn't work that way, right? They usually look at the highest credentials, unless it's of course like bachelor's plus something when you're getting points for 2 or more degrees. But in your case, master's is the highest one. So try to assess it. And if I were you, I would just go on WS and look for this online tool. First, it's free of charge to look at it, to understand where you're standing and what's in it. What options are there for type C workers? You're 29 and so on. Well, again, it depends on what kind of C category you're in, but I think we even had a special video on it on YouTube as well, right? We explained that first and foremost, right, there are different categories of C workers, right? And there are possibilities for you to apply for different immigration streams. We're not necessarily talking about pilots in here, and pilots, of course, I mean, it would be unwise to write them off from the table, but I would say that I would also look at provincial streams which are taking C-class applicants, right? Especially if you're saying that your IELTS is at level 8, if I remember it correctly, right? If you got work experience, if you got enough credentials to apply, well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are working in a C category and Canada doesn't need you. Besides, like, look, say it's sometimes quite, shady area, whether it would be C or B, depending on your job duties. So you might be a teller in a bank, which is a category C, but at the same time, right, banking transactions you do in your home country would actually qualify for you to be in category B. It's one of the examples popping up in my head, right? If we talk about this, C or B category, I have to look at your job duties to understand where we're standing. And you know what? Like, look, if you're looking forward for an one-on-one, tete-a-tete consultation, mostly welcome, right? If you're not comfortable to discuss your questions while I've been in here, right? If you're concerned on privacy, if you want us to elaborate more on your chances, feel free to come in. We would be more than glad to support you. Now, you got ECA from IQS, okay? What should be the right pathway for immigrate, for Atlantic immigration pilot, rural pilot? why? Like, I mean, George, why would you even go for pilot? So if you got your credentials assessed, right, you were working in a high skilled position, you got high chances for immigration. I mean, pilots are working, and don't take me wrong, but we're talking about pandemic. We're talking about circumstances, right, where nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And if you look at the situation overall, pilots versus, for example, provincial programs, right? Provinces were way more active during pandemic simply because what they were looking at, Ontario, they were looking at British Columbia and Quebec, right? Traditionally highly populated provinces, they were the hardest hit. We are in Ontario, right? Our numbers in coronavirus, right, they're inferior only to Quebec. And what happened with provinces, they said, okay, what we could do, we could use this situation, right, and attract applicants whom otherwise will not even be able to look at us in different circumstances. And provinces were very, very actively looking to attract applicants. If you look at Alberta, right, which was taking applicants before pretty much June, right, and then they said, like, enough is enough, we've taken more than we could swallow. Now they're looking to reform their immigration program and get back on track because they see that skilled applicants are in there and they could get this qualified applicants, those who would otherwise go to British Columbia or Ontario. So I would say that neither of these options would be priority number one for you. Again, I don't know your profile completely. I would probably start looking at PNPs first and then looking at pilots, though of course pilots are the option for you, right? Can I send my documents to another company? To that another, no, not really sure. That's probably part of the question. My apologies if I didn't understand it. Nova Scotia is Saskatchewan better to immigrate? Okay, so here's the deal. When it comes down to immigration, however mean it may sound, right, your primary goal for all those of you who are looking to immigrate to Canada, your primary goal is to immigrate. If somebody tells you tomorrow that you could get nomination from Nunavut, go there, okay? It does not really matter. Your primary purpose here is to make sure that you put your foot on Canadian soil. Now, with accordance to Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, permanent resident, and mind you, you become a permanent resident once you cross the border with your immigrant visa, you pass this border control, you have this interview with immigration authorities, and they make you an immigrant at your port of entry. So permanent resident of Canada, equally to a citizen, of course, right, is able to settle anywhere in Canada and move freely around Canada. So anything you've been promising to a particular province before is absolutely invalid as long as you came to the province and upon your arrival you decided not to stay there, right? It might be a bit of exaggeration, but say if you come to Saskatchewan, you exit the airport somewhere in Regina, you just look around, say, oh sure, seriously, that's how it looks in here? Well, thank you so much, I'm going to Vancouver. Well, you know what? That is your right. You could do so. Okay, you cannot fly to Vancouver right away, exit the airport, and say I'm staying in here. You still got to reach the province of your destination, but after you've done so, it's entirely 100% up to you what you're gonna do next, right? So, well, it's a bit of exaggeration with respect to exiting the airport, right, and getting back immediately, but in some circumstances, I would say strictly following the law, it's still possible. So when it comes down to the point where I would say that, you know what, you could go to, for example, Saskatchewan, or you're choosing Saskatchewan versus Nova Scotia, well, you could express your interest in both, right? You could create your profile in Saskatchewan Oasis, you could go for Nova Scotia, and that would be perfectly fine. In citizenship application, does entries should be exact, or you could put guest dates? Well, if it's a citizenship application, you got to be absolutely damn sure that you put exact dates, right? Because that's your residency calculator. Congratulations on the point of reaching it where you're going for citizenship, but yeah, it has to be exact dates, of course, right? If you're not, by the way, aware of your entry and exit, you could always request CBSA notes to seek when you were exiting Canada, when you were entering the country. Your explanation is very easy and clear. Well, appreciate it. I'm trying to make it as easy to digest as possible. Looking for answer. My apologies, guy, if I'm missing somebody's question, but reason being is just like it's a lot of questions in here. They're popping up way faster than I can read them sometimes, but I'm trying to do all I can in here. How can someone from Ghana apply to live and work in Canada as a registered nurse? Marine, again, sorry if I mispronounced somebody's name. Well, it doesn't really matter in fact where you're from, right? That's the beauty of Canadian immigration system, where you could apply from literally anywhere. The point here is that when it comes down to immigration, right? Immigration authorities are looking at these basic components we were talking before, at your age, at your education, your work experience, and your language skills. Everything else does not really matter. Everything else is not that important. You just have to look further at where you stand and what you're doing, right? And how you could apply for immigration. Because as long as these basic requirements are met and you could just wrap your profile and ideally create express entry profile, I'm not suggesting that express entry is the only way, right? But it's the most straightforward as of now, right? Now, question number 2, whether or not you got enough points to pass, right? If I don't, because the threshold right now is quite high, right? We're talking about 470 plus, and that is pretty much based to the pandemic, right? Due to the this infrequency of selections for federal skilled worker applicants. But regardless, right? If the points are quite high, so explanation why will not help you to immigrate, and you start looking for other alternatives, right? PNPs, provincial nominee programs. How can I get additional points, right? Now, if not PNPs, can I potentially try to get interest from one or another Canadian employer, right? Can I participate in job fairs? And that's why we post them fairly often on YouTube, right? Where we tell you where you could go and how you could participate. What else could you do, right? Could you actually look at the opportunities beyond that? Can I look at the pilot programs, right? Can I look at the owner-operator when I am inviting myself with my own company, right? That's another opportunity, and so on and so on. We could continue this list, but without, of course, knowing your profile is going to be a bit challenging. But that are the options to look at with respect to how to act further. If your reference letter doesn't show how many hours you work per week, how can you prove that your job was indeed full-time? Well, it may not necessarily state how many hours you were working, but as long as it says that it's been full-time, that usually be sufficient enough, right? If it doesn't state so, well, you could always get, for example, this information might be contained in your pay stubs, right? Which is saying whether it was a full-time or part-time position, whether it was paid per hour, and hourly rate is the following, and that's how it was calculated. It might be in your employment contract or in a job offer where they're saying that you're assuming a full-time position in a company. So there are different options on it. There are options to prove your experience, even for self-employed individuals or company owners, right? Where it's tremendously difficult to say whether you're working full-time or part-time. But in fact, it's still doable, because at the end of the day, it's all about balance of probabilities, how officers presume this, right? How they see it, how they would understand this story. Please explain about global skills strategy. You probably are talking about strategic initiative, right? And talking about the fact that there are certain occupation in, for example, high-tech industry, right? In specific industries where applicants are so needed that employers do not necessarily have to apply for labor market impact assessment. And speaking of LMIA, for those of you who are not entirely aware of what it is, this is the core document which gives a permission to an employer to hire a foreign worker, which essentially says that, you know, the fact that this employer would hire a specific foreign worker in this particular area, right, geographical area as well, right, would not negatively impact Canadian labor market. So none of Canadians or permanent residents of Canada would lose a job because this employer would bring a foreign worker. So when it comes to global talent stream, it's a different story, right? It's where it's understandable that these people are so needed, right? They got this crucial occupation, the crucial jobs, and employers need them and need to bring them fast. So these employers would not have to apply for LMIA in order to hire these foreign workers. That's just in a very, very quick nutshell. As always, thank you very much. Absolutely welcome. My pleasure. That's what I'm here for, right? To make sure that I would be able to address your questions. If you're a company director okay, that doesn't get paid a salary, but rather you share the profits of the company, how would you state it in your reference letter? Well, okay, here's the deal. It's a very good question, appreciate it, right? Now, you're a company owner and maybe you are not drawing the salary, right? But you're remunerated based on the company profits, and but you still withdraw it fairly regularly, right? You could use the multiple approach strategy, I would say, but or rather tactics, to demonstrate your bank account where it's visible that there were this regular quarterly, monthly, yearly incomes, right, deposits to your account from the company, or you were withdrawing money from your company, right, in your name, so you are cutting checks to yourself based on the performance of the company, but that's still a compensation for you. It might be stated in the reference letter as well that you're compensated, right, on a regular basis this amount of money or this percentage of money, right, or X amount, or average salary, right? Nobody knows how much exactly would be up to the last cent, but on average you were compensated this and this, right? You could always demonstrate that you were receiving this as a performance bonus, right, based on what you, not the company itself, were doing as well. So multiple documents all together, this stops from the company, right, or rather checks from the company, deposits to your account, explanation letter as well, right, and ideally if you got a contract in the company or anything from the company stating that you are paid, and this is the merit-based payment, right, this is the payment based on what you're doing, right, that would help a lot to demonstrate that you are compensated because you're working in a company, right? So we got to make sure that we would separate it in here from an investor who is compensated no matter what. So say you invested X amount of money in a company and the company is paying you, right, despite the fact that you are not working in a company. So we have to make sure that it's clear that you are paid because you're working in there, right, because of what you're doing as a director. Hope it would be clear. Does having a child with autism cause the work permit application getting rejected? Well, it usually has nothing to do with the work permit application, but if you ask here about immigration, now here's the deal. When it comes down to immigration, though this is not really the subject of discussion today, but I still believe that it would be worthwhile to answer the question. Now, when it comes down to immigration, all family members who are looking to immigrate to Canada would have to undergo medical examination, and you should be able to demonstrate that at the end of the day, right, you do not pose any danger to Canadian society, neither psychological, mental danger, right, nor, God forbid, of course, any transmittable diseases are in there. And at the same time, you also have to demonstrate that the financial threshold, which is about $20,000 per year or about $100,000 in a time span of 5 years, would not be exceeded by Canadian authorities. And when it comes down to this amount of money, it's not just for medical assistance, it also has to do a lot with the social assistance, and that's where the condition which you've explained in there might be applicable. Now, usually in many circumstances, again, because it's a very, very shady area, it's very difficult to answer this question while we're talking right now, but it's very difficult to answer this question without knowing all of the details. But I know scenarios where this threshold in the condition which you explained was not exceeded and people were able to immigrate. Now, I would probably leave it there because, again, like, I don't want to plunge deeper here into the discussion of different medical circumstances for different applicants. You work in the tech industry. Do you think it makes sense to immigrate to Atlantic provinces? Here's what I really think in here. I think that it really makes sense to immigrate to Canada, regardless whether you're going to Atlantic or not, right? If you somehow grasp an employer, right, and embrace an employer, because that's what you're trying to do, right, to make sure that you hug them and don't let them go until you're in Canada. If it works for you, go for it, right? Go for Atlantic. I would probably say that in Atlantic there aren't too many of those high-tech companies which would give you a job offer, but there are some, right? So if you're, say, at a very starting position as an IT professional, you find yourself a company which says, look, we need a network technician or IT technician or basic IT support, right? And we're able to invite this person, it's not a problem, right? You could always leave. There is no legal obligation for you to stay in Atlantic for years and years if you don't want to, right? You could come, you became a permanent resident, crossed the border, you came to Atlantic, right? You do not even have this legal obligation of actually going to your employer. And again, we had a separate video on it, right, where we explained that, yes, in fact, whether some may consider this being a little bit immoral. I'm not here commenting on my personal opinion, but regardless, right, there is no legal obligation for you to go and stay with a particular employer. So if you don't want to, well, that was your golden ticket to come to Canada. You came here, you became a permanent resident. Congratulations, right? Your future depends on you. If you don't want to stay in Atlantic, don't. When all Ontario colleges can come under readiness plan, do you have any guess on it? Well, here's the deal. Now, I don't really have an idea when Canadian colleges, specifically Ontario colleges, would have this readiness plan. For those of you who are not aware of what it means, is that if your academic institution has this readiness plan, and we will have a video posted on it separately, you will be able to come to Canada. Okay? In other words, you do not have to study remotely, you will be able to come. But that comes down to the point where your academic institution has to be ready to embrace you, has to be ready to welcome you. And you gotta look at those academic institutions where they are located, because traditionally, if you would go to Ontario, to Southern Ontario, right, to Toronto, to Greater Toronto area, there are portions of GTA which were returned back to stage 2 of openness or closeness, right? It's like the glass is half full, half empty, depends on how you look at it, right? But due to the rising number of those COVID cases, and COVID is not a joke, guys, I gotta tell you, so you gotta make sure that while these colleges will not have a readiness plan anywhere soon, but if we're talking about remote areas, if we're talking about, for example, Northern Ontario, I would say that these academic institutions there, talk about Sudbury, right? Talk about North Bay, Thunder Bay, Timmins, right? Colleges in there. Look at Thunder Bay. Well, if you, or Sault Ste. Marie, for example, if you go to a college in there, you will actually be able probably to be prepared to come fairly soon. They should be able to have this readiness plan because they got 0 to none cases of COVID. Now, we are pretty much at the point where we reach the threshold of 1 hour of talking, answering your questions, and I really sincerely appreciate you staying with us and asking your questions. You have no idea how much encouraging it is, right? How you help us with this, with your questions, and in fact, it helps a lot seeing all of you coming in, right, supporting us in here and sharing this master classes. I sincerely apologize if I'm not able to answer all of your questions, but as I said, like, you have no idea what's happening in chat where like people are going one by one, right, and questions are popping up. If I've missed somebody's question, feel free to drop us a line. Feel free to send an email, right? We will be able to look into your question and we'll try to address it. Leave a comment. We'll be able to look into this deeper, right, and try to help you as well. We'll do whatever possible to assist you in here. As of now, I would get back for 1 second. Here we go. Yep, to the slide, and just for 1 second returning back. Well, your feedback is of course appreciated, sharing is appreciated, and our next stream would be dedicated specifically to proof of funds. We will be talking about it. We will be talking about funds in the future, and in fact we will have some quite exciting news with respect to making money, if you will, for immigration to Canada. Just to give you a heads up on where we're standing here, because lots of people were telling me that it's expensive, it's not possible to get in there, and it's not always attainable. We started to partnership with the financial institutions to demonstrate you what could be done, how you could make money for immigration to Canada without leaving your home, right? And we will be just sharing our own personal experience. I will show you what we are doing with this regards. I mean not as a company, like as individuals, right? And now we are proving it, but all of this would be discussed further on and later on, and of course we will be posting it on YouTube as well. As of now, again, thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much for coming in. Apologies for not addressing all of your questions. As always, right, feel free to send us an email. I would be more than glad to talk to you and, of course, seeing you in Canada. Thank you, guys. Bye.